One of the topic types that you can have for your master thesis is the artifact one. In this type of a master thesis, what you actually do is that you develop a solution, you develop a tool, and then you have a bit of a different kind of results because you haven't gathered data like you do with the review or with interviews that you now have to present. So in this context, what you have to do is to present the results of your artifact. Now, that basically is 4.4, which is your results. And here it might be just, tool implementation or tool development. You can choose what kind of title you want, but usually you don't use results here. The objective of this part is to actually show how you went from nothing to your actual tool. We discussed previously that a way to do this is the method you can use in this regard is the design science method, but you can also just describe the steps without relying on a specific method, such as the design science method. But what you present here is going to have a structure that is very reflective of how you developed your tool. So the first paragraph you have here is again this introductory paragraph where you describe the objective, or rather objective, you remind the reader of what the objective was. You have this objective in introduction and you have it in your method section. And then you're going to describe the outline of this subsection, how you have chosen to structure this subsection. Now, how is that section then done? Well, it usually boils down to actually two main parts. You can have it in more parts, but usually it's only two main parts. One is the requirements. And this is basically where you clarify the requirements that your tool has to fulfill, or the requirements you had in building your solution or tool or whatever it might have been. In your method, you described how you elicited the requirements. But here, you actually now elicit and you show the documented requirements you had. And of course, the requirements can be of different categories. It could be like non-functional, it could be functional, it could be user interface. It depends on what the tool is. So what you have to do is that you have to present the different categories. You have to present the actual requirements. You have to also provide a motivation why you have this requirement. You can't just say, I want this requirement. You have to provide an explanation why it is necessary to fulfill this requirement. And you also have to have a prioritization, because you often have more requirements than you actually will decide to build. So when you have that, you need to prioritize which requirements you're going to actually develop. Oftentimes what happens is that at the beginning of the project of your thesis, you have a bunch of requirements you think you will be able to deliver, but at the end of it, you did not have time to complete all the requirements. So you need to have a clear prioritization as to why you chose certain requirements to do. And bear in mind that in the method section, you defined how you're going to work with requirements. Most often time, you're doing user stories. So then here you have to present the user stories. So first part, 4.1, is basically the requirements of your solution. Now, this is when you have requirements. Sometimes you don't have requirements. I'll say that there are two ways of doing this kind of theses. One is when you have a problem or something that you have been given to solve, and it is basically requirements. Then we do as we talked about. But sometimes you're going to develop a new method that has not really come or is born of requirements. It's not a solution that is intended to be maybe user with an interface for a user. It's not a tool like that, but rather it's how to solve a problem. For example, assume that you have waiting times in a process and you want to find an algorithm. You want to develop an algorithm that can detect the waiting times and the causes of these waiting times. So this is not a requirement in the way we talked about. Here, what you do is that you have actually a conceptual foundation that leads to definitions. Because here the objective is not to develop a tool that can be used by a user where they upload an event log and then they get some things and they can visually see it and they can interact with it. What you want to do here is to solve a problem of how do I assess the waiting times of a process and find out why this waiting time exists. In these cases, what you have to do is that you have to have a conceptual foundation, meaning that you have to define, what do I mean by a waiting time? How will I detect it? So what happens in these kind of theses is that you don't have a set of requirements in the user story forms, but the requirements are these ones. It's your conceptual foundation where you say a waiting time is when a case can be processed but is not being processed. And then you give a definition of how that looks like. And that is a formula. A formula that is the basis for your algorithm. So in these cases, what you do is that you have to have an overview of the whole thing. So you have to give an overview of what is a waiting time, how does it work, and so forth and so on. Then you have to begin with definition 1. You explain that this is the formula where you put these kind of all these Greeks. It's like a Greek text there. And then you explain what that means. And you give a motivation for why it's this way. Then you go to definition 2. And these are basically your requirements here, because the algorithm you're developing, which is not going to be a trivial one, it's going to be a difficult challenge to solve, is basically implementing the definitions. Now, 4.2 in your thesis, regardless of if it's a requirement-based or a definition-based artifact or model, what you're going to do is that you're going to talk about the implementation. Now you have the requirement, the input. You have the input. Now you have to describe how this is going, how you develop this step by step. So the first part you have to cover is the how. How did you do this? And that might end up with different choices you have made, right? You have made the choice of using Python notebook. You have made the choice of using Kafka. You have made the choice of doing X or Y and Z. So provide a rationale, provide motivation for why you chose this tool, why you chose to do it this way. You can't just say, I implemented it with X, Y, and Z. You have to explain. What is the rationale? What is the reason? Now, this could be based on references that, this is the solution that has been recommended to do. But it could also be that I needed this and this and this, and for that purpose, Kafka is better. And then that becomes your rationale, right? And then it's you have to have some kind of a design, an architectural design of the whole solution, how different things are connected, how different components are interacting with each other, and so on, and make that one pretty detailed. And then you also have to, again here, provide motivation for why you chose to structure it in this way. I would even put this one first, and then I would put that one. And the third part, so basically what you're doing is that you're showing how you implemented this, each component that you implemented, the choices you made for each component, and why you made those choices. You're being fully transparent in explaining this. And 4.3 is going to be a demo. Now that you have it, you have to show how it looks like. It could be screen shots, it could be explanations, but think of it this way. You begin this whole section with saying, these are my inputs, requirements, or definitions. Then you say, this is how I built it. And now in the third part, you have to show what you built. And for God's sake, do not forget to put a link to the repository, your GitHub link or whatever, so the reviewer or anyone who reads it can actually click on it and see the whole package, see the code, see the things that you have actually developed. So just to make a very summary here, what we're talking about is that you have your artifact. First is the introductory paragraph. Then 4.1 is the requirements or the definitions. See it as the inputs. 4.2 is the actual implementation with all the motivations. Do not forget to put that overall architectural design figure. And 4.3 is that you have developed, now show me, which is the demo.